We are going to be in 1 Samuel chapter 17 and 18. And we continue our discussion of faith, but we're going to look at some things in the life of David. And I believe it was last fall, I think it was, or last winter, when Brother Greg kind of covered the life of David. And David is an interesting study in faith because there are some interesting players in the story. You have Saul, that you remember the children of Israel, they flat said, "We want to be like the nations around us, so give us a king." And you say, well, but brother, that's because Samuel's sons were bad, they were wicked. No, they had been wanting to be like the nations around them for a long time. That was their time to push for it. And if you remember back, what were two of the things that were Saul's greatest characteristics for why people thought he would make a good king? Two. Do what? All right, size and... He was evil? Okay. He was good looking and he was tall. You say, that's it? That's it? Truth is, generally, that principle still holds true today. If I were another 2 inches taller and I worked in the regular business world, I could make another $65,000 more than what someone my current height makes. You say, yes, they have those statistics. Now you say, how do you beat those statistics? Start your own business and become a multimillionaire. All right, and then you can pay what you're worth. But remember that everybody in Israel, they hit Saul at the shoulder, and then from the shoulder up, he was literally head and shoulders above everyone. But Saul had a character defect. And his character defect was he was chicken. He said, coward. When the time came to make him king, do you remember where he was at their big festival of king making? Hiding where? In the luggage. And we think of Saul as this young lad, but Jonathan was already born. Jonathan was already a young man. And that introduces, of course, the second great character, and that is Jonathan. You will search hard in the pages of Scripture to find anyone better than Jonathan. If you ever find anything in Scripture that is negative about Jonathan, you let me know. I've searched for years to find something bad about Jonathan. It's not there. Jonathan had guts. Jonathan and his armor bearer went and took a fight to the Philistines by themselves. When Saul made a rash order that was going to result in Jonathan's death, Jonathan said, "Then I guess, Dad, you need to kill me. You're the king, it's your rule. I broke your rule, I need to die." And it was the people who said, "No one's going to harm Jonathan today." It's Jonathan that will make a covenant with David. It is Jonathan who is one of the greatest examples of faithfulness. Jonathan is, in almost every point, the exact opposite of his father. And so that takes us into 1 Samuel chapter 17 and verse 11. And we have this story of Goliath. I say story, I can say historical account. I believe that it happened the way that it's written. What happens here, and what they used to do back in the day, was you would send a champion from each side down onto the field of battle. And whoever won, then it was kind of agreed upon that if your champion beat our champion, then we'll serve you, but if we beat your champion, you serve us. Now, what's a practical reason why that's a good way to fight a war? If your guy can beat up the other guy, then you guys don't have to go to full-fledged. Why is that a good thing? Do what? Lives saved. Saves lives. How about economically? If you're at war, and especially back then, but even now today, were the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan in the Middle East, were those things cheap? Have they hurt us economically as a nation? We've got a few trillion extra in debt now. Everybody forgets. They say, well, we started. No, we never stopped after Operation Desert Storm in 1990. In 1995, I was still laying Marines to rest at Arlington who were killed in live combat in Iraq in 95. I said, what? Yeah. Even though the war technically had been over for 4 years, we were still in war at that time. So for 30 years, essentially, we've been in the Middle East. It has been very, very catastrophic on the economy. Anybody else ever see Saving Private Ryan? All right. I did not. I've seen the clips that go with the Metallica song. And you say, no, that's what I've seen. And you say, no, that's enough. Because I remember my grandmother, and you say, I give Private Ryan because a lot of people forgot about this, but I remember my grandmother telling me that there were whole families that at the start of World War II, all the sons, all the cousins, the only people left in the family literally was Grandma and Grandpa. They had an entire platoon that got wiped out from her region of Missouri. That was the end of that family's line. That was the whole premise of Saving Private Ryan. One of my cousins, his father had been in World War II in Korea. He had already done 2 tours in Vietnam. He volunteered for 3 more tours so that they wouldn't send his dad over. You say, well, that was... The way war is done now, it's not near as painful. Almost everyone that enlists in the military now is at least 3rd generation familial. They don't have to have a draft anymore because now entire family lineages, the sons just go to volunteer because dad and grandpa and great-grandpa were all in the military. If Brother Ronnie was here, he could tell you back when he was in college and they were doing the draft numbers, there was an old boy that he was going to school with that they missed the first part of the lottery drawing where they had the 365, and the kid thought his was going to be the last one. So they all went out for burgers and ice cream cones. And when they got back, what the boy didn't realize was the first number drawn was his birthday, and he was the first one that shipped. He said, why are you making a point about war? Why would you be willing to go on ahead and say, you know what, if your guy beats our guy, it keeps your family from being wiped out. It keeps your economy from being wiped out. The disease, the famine, the loss of life, all of those things And so as this story opens with Goliath, the horror of war is real for these people. So that when Goliath comes out, and he says there in verse 9, if he's able to fight with me and kill me, then we'll be your servants. But if I prevail against him and kill him, then you shall be our servants and serve us. And the Philistine said, I defy the armies of Israel this day. Give me a man that we may fight together. And when Saul and all Israel heard these words of the Philistine, they were dismayed and greatly afraid. And then skip down to verse 16. Here's how long this went on. And the Philistine drew near and presented himself 40 days, morning and evening. Twice a day he comes out for 40 days and says, someone come out and fight me. Who should have been the one who went out? Who should have gone out? You say Saul, Tommy? I got some votes for Saul. Yeah. There used to be a time in our military when colonels and captains went to the field with their troops. Now they stay in air conditioning behind a computer screen. It's a whole different thing to send someone else to death when you're in air conditioning. Saul doesn't want to send anybody, and Saul doesn't want to go himself for 40 days. Now look at who else is there. Down in verse 28, it says, Now Eliab, his oldest brother, heard when he spoke to the men, and Eliab's anger was aroused against David. You remember when Samuel went to anoint a new king, and God kept saying about all of David's brothers, these aren't the guys. And Samuel looked at Jesse, he said, do you have any more boys? He said, well, we got that kid David out there, he's out with the sheep. And he said, go get him, because we're not going to do anything till he gets here. And as soon as he gets here, God says, this is the one. All of David's brothers looked like they should have been the next king. And we talk about that verse, God looks on the heart, not. No. Yeah, I know that's what it says, but right here tells you a truth. For 40 days, his brothers are down there on the field of battle, sitting in their tents, listening to Goliath badmouth God and God's people, and none of them have enough guts to step on the field. All of David's brothers lacked character and integrity and fortitude. And if you have to have a king, if you have to have a president, if you have to have a governor, and I'll say if you have to have a sheriff, you want one that's got character, one that's got integrity, and one that's got fortitude. Now David's a motivated guy. And sometimes we downplay motivation. Sometimes it's good to motivate people with a stick. Sometimes it's good to motivate them with the carrot. If I get a volunteer to read verse 24 and 25, verse 24 and 25, 1 Samuel 17.
And all the men of Israel, when they saw the man, fled from him, and were dreadfully afraid. So the men of Israel said, Have you seen this man who is come up? Surely he has come up to defy Israel. And it shall be that the man who kills him, the king will enrich with great riches, will give him his daughter, and give his father's house exemption from taxes in Israel.
All right. Now this is a pretty good deal.
Really good.
He gets wealth. He gets to be part of the king's family. and his parents are tax exempt for life. That beats a homestead exemption any day. And what's David's response? And you say, well, David, in my heart, I believe David would have gone down to the fight anyways. Who understands there's nothing wrong if there's a reward? If you would have cleaned up the mess anyways, but there's a reward out there, there's nothing wrong with still cleaning up the mess and taking the reward. We have this mentality in some places in our society that says, if you were going to do it anyways, you shouldn't take the reward. No, take the reward. They were willing to pay it. No one else was going to do it. You say, well, you would have done it for free. Mm-hmm. True or false? What people get at no cost generally has very little value.
True.
That's true. Saul paying a price to David for David doing what the entire army and the king would not do gives David value to all of them. Now, if you ask me a question, where was Jonathan? I think Saul told Jonathan to stay back. I think Saul told Jonathan to stay back home. I don't think he let Jonathan come. In my heart, I believe if Jonathan would have been on the field of battle, I think Jonathan would have gone down on day one and he would have whipped Goliath. With every fiber of my being, I believe that. Because every other time Jonathan walks straight into a fight where he should get killed, and he doesn't care. He's a tough dude. So that verse 26, he says, what shall be done for the man who takes away the reproach from Israel? For who is this uncircumcised Philistine that he should defy the armies of the living God? Sunday morning we talked about covenant. We talked about covenant in the Bible class. What was the sign of covenant in the Old Testament? What was the sign of covenant? Circumcision. It's still the sign of the covenant in the New Testament. Colossians 2, it's the circumcision not made with hands. This one was a circumcision made with hands. What are some symbols on cars or trucks that you've ever seen that tell you people's affiliation, that if you mess with them, it implies that you'll mess with their affiliation with something else? What are some?
Well, I've seen the clergy bumper sticker sometimes.
Okay. I wouldn't worry too much about the clergy bumper sticker. If a reverend gets in a fight, I don't think the other reverends are coming to help him 9 times out of 10.
He's got a higher power.
He should have a higher power.
Well, they'll have pictures of a gun or something, I carry or something like that.
Okay. But think a little bit bigger as far as brotherhood. You ever seen a yellow emblem with a horse's head on it? What are they telling you they're part of?
Calvary.
Cav. One of the more common ones, if you see someone with a leather cut, and it's got a motorcycle wheel with 2 wings on it, what does that cut signify? They're part of a gang. 2 biggest motorcycle gangs. One founded by disgruntled Army Airborne. That was the Hells Angels. The second by disgruntled Marines. That's the Banditos. That's why the Banditos are red and gold like the Marine Corps. You say, are you kidding me? No, I'm not. World War II veterans came back, started the Hells Angels. They were Army Airborne. They wanted that brotherhood still. But how about when you see on someone's license plate or on the back of their vehicle a black rectangle with a thin blue line in it? What does that signify? They're law enforcement, or their family of law enforcement. We have signs and symbols in our culture like that. Colleges have fraternities. One of the main ones for a long time was a square and compass. If you saw that on something, you say, "Oh, they're a Mason." You know. The reason we have those kinds of associations is the concept that when you mess with one, you mess with all. That's what the point of those fellowships ultimately, that's what a big part of it is. That there's a covenant that takes place. I can't call upon Tommy and say, "Brother, because we're both part of the Crawford family." Why can't I call upon you and say we're both part of the Crawford family, Tommy?
Because you're not part of it.
I'm not part of the Crawfords. But if I say to you, "Brother, by the blood of Christ
That's right.
and our baptism, now I've placed a claim of covenant, where the blood and the water are thicker than most blood and water." The moment he said, "Who is this uncircumcised Philistine?" he was reminding the entirety of Israel that the guy that they've been in fear of doesn't get invited to God's family reunion because he's not part of the family. And it is that premise alone that gives David boldness as he goes out, is that he's going out in the covenant of God against someone who has blasphemed those in covenant with God and the one who makes the covenant valid. Because listen to what he says again. Verse 32 through 37, if I can get a volunteer to read 1 Samuel 17, 32 through 37.
Then David said to Saul, "Let no man's heart fail because of him. Your servant will go and fight with this Philistine." And Saul said to David, "You are not able to go against the Philistine or this Philistine to fight with him, for you are a youth, and he a man of war from his youth." But David said to Saul, "Your servant used to keep his father's sheep. When a lion or a bear came and took a lamb out of the flock, I went out after it and struck it and delivered the lamb from its mouth. And when it arose against me, I caught it by its beard, struck and killed it. Your servant has killed both lion and bear. This uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them, seeing he has defied the armies of the living God." Moreover, David said, "The Lord delivered me from the paw of the lion, from the paw of the bear. He will deliver me from the hand of this Philistine." And Saul said to David, "Go, and the Lord be with you."
All right. When we look at faith, faith can be cumulatively built. Faith can be cumulatively built. Is it possible that most anyone in here, within reason, could get to the point where they could do 20 push-ups? You say, "Well, some of us, brother." Yeah. You say, "I don't know about 20 push-ups." Well, how do you get to 20 push-ups? Or how do you get to 200? I had buddies, they used to like to do like 250 every night before they went to bed. And I thought, what is wrong with you? Man, you just did all that exercise, got your blood pumping. You are not going to sleep anytime soon. And they never did. And I tell them, if you're going to do that, do it at 6 o'clock after you get done eating supper. And they're like, well, that wouldn't work. Well, all right then. But all my buddies that would do 250 push-ups, what would they do? They didn't start at 250. You know where most of them started? 10. This was when we were all younger. I have no goal to do 250 push-ups now. Do what, brother?
I said, I don't have a goal to do 10.
Now, I think you should set a goal for 250, brother. Just spread it out over the year.
Okay.
One a day.
Yeah.
Hit 250 days if you need to take a day or two in between each one. But the simple fact is, if you did one push-up a day every day for 7 days, how long till you could do 2? I said, well, it wouldn't be that long, brother. When we look at faith in the Bible, there's a point where Jesus' faith is deceptive. Because Jesus always was in harmony with the Father. Now, what Jesus did, can his disciples do? If Mark 11 is to be believed. When Jesus says, you shall say to this fig tree, you can say to the mountain. He told them, you can do similar stuff that I do. Their problem was, most of the time that the apostles were with Jesus, did they speak words of faith or words of doubt?
No.
Doubt. Because frequently Jesus rebukes them and says, how is it you have no faith? But then when they go out and they do what Jesus tells them to do, they come back and they go, it's amazing, it worked. We did all this cool stuff you said we could do. And then they go like another week and then they're back to a place of no faith. Part of what Jesus did with them for 3.5 years was had them do spiritual push-ups to build them up so that they would have faith. But here's where this applies to you. Here's where it applies to me. If you've never beaten something that comparatively would be smaller, be careful when you try and tackle a Goliath with nothing else on which to base your belief. So you said, no. Tall gypsy dude that's the world champion boxer. Can't think of his name right now. White dude from England. Tyson Fury. Tyson Fury's like that tall. If you've never been in a fight, do you want to, and we'll make it, for those who remembered Evander Holyfield, Mike Tyson, Muhammad Ali, George Frazier. If you've never put on boxing gloves, who would have wanted to have stepped in the ring with Ali or Frazier or Holyfield? David's confidence comes because he's already been doing the kind of things that set him up to be at a place of success. He knows what he can do based off of what he's done. Remember, Hebrews 11:1 says, now faith is that faith is always present tense. But faith has a place where it finds a foundation in the past. Years ago, I don't remember. Yeah, he was either Russian or Eastern Bloc. It was this power lifter, and other dudes kept tying him. And his coaches told him to go out, and now they lied to him. They shouldn't have lied to him, but they lied to him, and they said, and we'll say it's like 650 pounds. They said, the bar is now set for your one-time best of 650. And actually it was like 680 or something like that. He went out, and in his head, he believed what? He could do it because he'd done it. And then he got out there, and the potential from doing that much work over that much time, he actually had the ability to do more. But in his mind, he did not believe that he could do more. But when they told him it's your one-time best, he said, okay, this I can go out and do. And the raw potential of his muscles was there. He went out, he did it, and they told him afterward, they said, you set the world record and you broke your best record. And he was absolutely ecstatic, got the gold, the championship, and all that. That's the physical side of faith. Is your memory of what you have done in times past where you have succeeded walking with God. And I would encourage you, go home and write a faith journal. And go back and think about times where you did great things with God. And remind yourself of when you did great things with God. Remind yourself of when you exercised your faith and you achieved. And then come back to this passage and catch the next part. Your servant has killed both the lion and the bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them. Tommy, you ever fought a dude that's 11 feet tall? Neither have I, brother. Biggest dude I ever fought was 6'6", and he had me by 120 pounds, and it hurt. Fortunately, it was friendly. It was just for exhibition and fun. You say, how fun? It wasn't fun by the time it was over. When you look up and the person's nearly twice your size, Goliath's shoulders were probably about that wide. You understand that? I'm 2 feet from one side to the other. Some people say I'm broad-shouldered. I look up at Goliath and I'm going, Goliath's probably 4.5, 5 foot across on his shoulders. His mail coat weighed 5,000 shekels. Even if a shekel, let's break this down to simple math. Even if a shekel is, say, 1/4 ounce, that'd still be 1,250 ounces. Dude had over 80 pounds of armor going by a light standard. You say, no, brother, I know it was more than that. But that's what he wore. His staff that he threw was more like a 12-foot long fence post. The paws on that guy. But where does David place his faith? The uncircumcision of the Philistine. He's not on God's side. He's defied God, and I'm going forward in God, believing in God that I'm going to achieve this. And Saul says to David, go and the Lord be with you. And then look at verse 48. Goliath comes out beginning at verse 43, curses David by the Philistine gods. And in verse 45, David says, you've come to me with a sword, with a spear, and with a javelin, but I come to you in the name of the Lord of hosts, the God of the armies of Israel, whom you have defied. David's entire basis of his faith and everything he's doing is based upon his covenant relationship with God, with the one who has his back. And then he says again in verse 47, the last clause, the battle is the Lord's, and he will give you into our hands. David doesn't even claim it for himself. He's claiming it for the whole nation. And if I get someone to read 48. Anybody who wants to can read verse 48.
So it was, when the Philistine arose and came and drew near to meet David, that David hurried and ran toward the army to meet the Philistine.
I know it's wrong to say this general's name now. He used to have a statue in Memphis. But he had one philosophy in war, and he said, to be the firstest with the mostest. He wasn't a great general. There's a lot of reasons why people dislike him. But he knew one thing, be the first one to hit and hit with everything you have. Apply that to faith. Why is it hard to have faith? I'm going to use something simple, Brother Tommy. If I come to you and I say, Brother Tommy, got the ingrown toenail, I want you to pray for it. How many minutes will we spend discussing the problem of an ingrown toenail? That by the time we're done, the only thing we'll think that we can do for it is either have the doctor rip it out or try and pry it up and use Epsom salts to relieve pressure, and maybe in 30 days it'll get better.
Or we could also cut it off.
Or we just cut off the toe. It doesn't work when it's a big toe. You kind of have to have it. This is why Tommy is not an MD, y'all. Tommy's solution, cut off the big toe and the thumb. All right, thank you, Lord, that Brother Tommy is not an MD. All right, and Sister Sandy agrees heartily. What was the only thing David talked about where Goliath was concerned?
And he would fail.
That he was what?
He would fail.
He would fail. And to Saul and to the men of Israel, the only thing he said is, he's uncircumcised. He's going to fail. God's going to give me the victory. For 40 days, I can tell you how the conversation went in the camp of Israel and in Saul's chambers. Saul big, but have you seen Goliath? That dude makes two of Saul, maybe even almost three. You seen his beam? You seen that spear he throws? His spear is almost as big as I am. I ain't going out there to fight him. How long till you can't win once that gets in to your heart and into your mind? Since we may or may not have much football this year, if before the game, the coach, the quarterback, and the defensive captain all got up in front of the men in the locker room, and they said, guys, today the opposing line has 500 pounds on us. They're 300% stronger. They're 600% faster. We're like a bunch of little kids in kindergarten playing flag football. Their quarterback can throw the ball 300 yards at 92 miles an hour and hit his target perfect. Those guys are so tough, they drink salt water for their hydration. And all of them beat each other with barbed wire just to get psyched up for the game. And you say, oh, well, nobody would believe that. Who understands, even with something that ridiculous, you could psych out your own team? Because what would it put in their head? Fear. And fear puts in doubt, and doubt puts you in a place of paralysis. And you say, but brother, that would be outrageously ridiculous. But you know what would happen? If on the opening drive, on the first possession, that quarterback hit his receiver for an 80-yard pass, dead center of the numbers, in the end zone, you know what your team all of a sudden would believe? He can throw it 300 yards at 96 miles an hour and hit every target dead perfect. Where faith is concerned, if you spend more time talking about the problem, it starts to put you in a place where you will not believe it possible to move the mountain. Years ago, there was a big old dude had to take in when I was out on patrol. And he was big. I mean, he was half again me and then some. And one of the deputies said, they said, Brian, what would you have done if he'd have resisted? I said, I'd have fought with everything I had. And they said, he probably still would have beat you. I said, yeah. I said, but he'd have paid a high price for it. And they said, do you think you'd have lost? I said, I don't know, but he would have paid a high price for it. He said, why wouldn't you just say that he'd probably beat you? Because the last thing I ever wanted in my head to ever go out on patrol was the thought that today someone was going to beat me and I wasn't going to come home. Think about, come on, y'all. Youngins, come on. Mark 11, Jesus said to us, whatsoever things you say that you believe in your heart are the things that you shall have. So if we are at that place where we psych ourselves out and believe it's not possible, it's not too long until our words follow, and then there's no action for our faith to take place upon. It's that time. That's your extra buzzer. That's your extra buzzer. What's our song of invitation, Brother Grant?
Number 62.
62. Number 62, have thine own way. To any youth who are going to go to Itchtuckney tomorrow, make sure that you touch base with Tyler. It's $11.50 and $5 for lunch.
Okay.
Give or take.
$11.50 and 5, whatever we get for fast food wise. So yeah, 5.
Okay.
7. That's it.
All right. $11.50 for the Itchtuckney part, and then bring whatever money you want for food to eat, as much as you will make you happy.
There you go.
And leaving from the building at 10 o'clock. So, all right. Do keep the Webster family in prayer with the passing of Ensley. Ensley passed early Monday, about 2 a.m. So please keep the Webster and associated families in prayer with little Ensley's passing. And then Glenn called me this afternoon if anybody has a more recent update. Frank did get put over at Haven Hospice in Palatka. He is basically responsive, but he's not making eye contact. They've got him running on about 10 liters of oxygen, where normally it's 3 to 5, 3 to 6. I'm going to assume that's because of respiratory issues tied to the COVID. But do please keep Brother Frank and the people that minister to him in prayer. Phyllis and Shirley are going to Tennessee for the widow and widowers event. So keep them in prayer for travel mercies. What else do we have that we need to be mindful of right now?
I'm Michael.
Yeah, brother.
My good friend Shannon, his nephew Dallas has COVID. He's a Walmart manager and probably got exposed somewhere in that, but he's not real sick, but he has COVID.
Okay. All right. And sister in Texas that we've been keeping in prayer, Sister Margie Flores. She continues to recover from COVID. Please keep her in prayer. What else do we have? Number 62. That'll be the song of encouragement. As we said Sunday night in the lesson on Revelation, as well as last Wednesday, I want to encourage you, continue to be prayerful for those in authority. Be prayerful for the political season. I'm not here to tell you to endorse one side or the other. What I will say is when both sides are worried about corruption in the ballot process and the election process, we need to be prayerful about that. We are at a very crucial time in our country's history on many levels. And 1 Timothy 2, the Holy Spirit tells us by the Apostle Paul to pray for those in authority, to pray for all men, but especially those in authority, that we might lead quiet and peaceable lives. Brother Rich sent us an article about Nevada, that if you're a gaming or other ill repute establishments, you can have about as many people as you want, but if you're a church, 50 is your max. Governor out in California is still trying to persecute churches and tell them that they cannot assemble in public, nor can they meet in homes. This is a time for prayer. As a passage, Brother Tyler and I, we were preparing the video for Friday morning. Colossians 4. The Apostle Paul talking about Epaphroditus. You don't have to know how to say his name, but if you'll read Colossians 4, you'll come across it where it says that he labored diligently in prayer for the church at Colossae. You know, sometimes we come up on someone, maybe you've done this, maybe you've had it done to you. You know, and Tyler will say, Tyler, what's going on? And he tells me, and I go, well, is there anything I can do? And he goes, pray. And I go, well, is there anything I can do other than that? Because I'd sure like to do something helpful. And then someone says, brother, I don't know why my prayers don't get answered. Probably because you don't believe in what your prayers are. But that's a different discussion for a different day. In Genesis chapter 1, over and over again it says, and God said, and God said, and God said, and God said. You and I in prayer have the ability, by faith, to change the complexion of the world in which we live, because God set this world up to function on words. And if you don't believe that, husbands, look at your wife and for the next 10 days, say, I loathe, detest, hate, and cannot stand the sight of you. I wish you were dead and a semi would run you over twice. And if at the end of 10 days, with her knowing it's an experiment, if you're still alive, you come and tell me. And you say, brother, I wouldn't do that even as a test. That's the point. You say, even as a test, that has the potential to be catastrophic. But now I'll give you the opposite side of that. Here's the opposite side, Brother Tommy. To look at your wife and say, I love you, I appreciate you, you're a blessing to me, I'm glad you're part of my life, and I'm better for you being here. Now, brother, don't worry, it's on here. Sister Sandy, get the timestamp and have someone cut you a GIF of it, or a GIF, whichever way you like to say it. GIF is on sandwiches, a GIF is what you watch, all right? Let's be clear on that. And then send it to Tommy in a 5-second GIF, and then he can watch it over and over again, and he can say it to you. What would happen? You say, well, she knows it's just a test. But if you did it 10 times, 10 days, like Goliath, morning and evening, came out and cursed, if you morning and evening blessed, what might change? What might change if the children of God sought to bless our own land in prayer? Instead of talking about how bad everything is, what if we said, dear God, put people across that guy in California to slap his head on straight? That Goliath who seeks to persecute your children, that uncircumcised Philistine. Raise up a David out there in California for him, Lord. What if? What if? You say, why do we do it? So we can lead quiet and peaceable lives. And it's okay for us to have that motive so that we can lead quiet and peaceable lives.